Well, in the end, it was unbelievably close at Zandvoort, as it would be on a circuit like that. Formula One cars, the way they are, incredibly competitive. To the backdrop, we shouldn't forget of the new stiffer construction rear that Pirelli have brought in since the British Grand Prix. That has lifted the performance of Mercedes and Ferrari, and it showed again at Zandvoort. But Red Bull got the pole. But to give you an idea of how close it was, think about this lap time, 1 minute 8.923. That was the lap that Max did at the beginning of Q3 in his first run. And you thought, that has got to be the pole. That is an unbelievable lap. First lap ever around Zandvoort, under 1 minute 9. Well, guess what lap time Lewis Hamilton did on his second run when he lost the pole by the margin of 0.038 of a second. That's right, Lewis did a 1:8.923, exactly the same time to a thousandth of a second that Max had done on the first run. Difference was, of course, those two laps, although they were identical in terms of time, were very different in terms of composition. Just look at the difference in top speeds, for example. Lewis on his quickest lap, 314 kilometers an hour past the start-finish line. Max on his quickest lap, 307 kilometers an hour. With Pierre Gasly and the AlphaTauri Honda also doing 307, you've got to conclude that that is somewhat representative of where Honda are in their setup around Zandvoort. But then beyond that, you've got to say Red Bull Honda have got the package absolutely right. Obviously really, really quick in the middle section of the lap, particularly on the quick corners. Watching Max on that lap was just eye-watering. Incredible to see a driver of that quality in a car of that quality, the amount of grip that it had, but nonetheless, Max taking it to the absolute edge. And the second run he did, the car was just on a knife edge everywhere, but beautifully in the control of Max Verstappen. Everything's still happening in that very supple way about which we've spoken. And if nothing else, Zandvoort stands as a very good circuit now that highlights the quality of drivers like Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Charles Leclerc. And against that, you look at the shunt that Carlos Sainz had this morning and the shunts of the two Williams drivers this afternoon, Nicholas Latifi and George Russell. All three of those drivers falling under the heading of relatively spiky inputs. We've talked about that before when comparing George with Lando, and I've made the point that Lando does have this very, very supple feel to his inputs, whereas George is definitely more aggressive in everything he does, very, very confident that he's going to be able to catch the car on whatever it does, and everything is like this, whereas Lando is like that. And for George, it did get away from him as he was trying very hard to make it through into Q3. On the last run in Q2 and the second last corner, the right-hander, the back end just got away. There was talk about him hitting a curb on the inside, but everybody's using that curb on the inside. This was all about just the car flicking away like that because George was in the absolute edge and wasn't warning the car, perhaps in a way that, say, a Charles Leclerc or a Max would be warning the car at that point. It just got away from him. Classic shunt, very similar to Carlos Sainz's shunt in FP3 this morning when he lost it in a rather unusual place. The turn 2 is a very quick right-hander, or nicely quick right-hander, where they used to be able to get fabulous drifts before they set the car up for Hans Rug, but now it's and get on the power for a fraction and then brake hard. So it's all about warning the car and those supple inputs. And for Carlos, it was on the power, on the brakes, back end went away into the wall. So, and Nicholas Latifi, I think slightly different there. He is a relatively spiky driver compared with, say, Lando Norris, but slightly unlucky. He was on his run trying to get through into Q3, done a very good job to get into Q2. Came through Shivlak, the turn 7, really quick right-hander. And as he came out, Lewis Hamilton was in the middle of the road, completely out of the way, not in any way interfering with Nicholas's line. But nonetheless, it was enough for Nicholas to be slightly lose concentration. He was too far on the edge as he went into the next right-hander and just lost the rear. So that was a function, perhaps more than anything, of the traffic at Zandvoort. And there is so much traffic. And traffic is what accounted for some of the big names in qualifying as well, because neither Sergio Perez nor Sebastian Vettel got out of Q1. Sergio Perez was a victim of Red Bull, perhaps overthinking it, leaving the run a little bit too late. And the lap that Sergio needed to do in order to get to the start-finish line before the checkered flag was such a slow lap, with so many cars going slowly after you clawed. By the time he got there, the checkered flag was out. Sebastian Vettel's slightly different as with Lance Stroll, because Aston Martin chose to run both their drivers at the end of the first run when I guess they anticipated the track would be relatively clear, but they didn't really get a lap time in there, and then the clock was ticking. They were under pressure. There were a few running wide incidents, and Sebastian didn't get a lap in, partly because of an incredible traffic jam going into the last two corners, and a very nasty moment when one of the Haas drivers pulled out right in front of him and Sebastian was heavily on the anchors and the lap was gone. And Lance Stroll didn't make it out of Q2 because of the Nicholas Latifi incident. Already Q2 had been delayed because of George going off. By the time they'd sorted out the fence there, the car wasn't bad. In fact, George rode back to the pits. But when Nicholas Latifi went off, that was the end of Q2. And anybody who hadn't got into the top 10 at that point was out. And that included Lance Stroll, but it also included, notably, Lando Norris, who also fell under the heading of a driver that never got a lap in because of the traffic. All this meant that there were going to be some changes. And the big result of Q3, in many ways, was Antonio Giovinazzi, a driver we've spoken about a little bit on this channel. I'm a bit of a fan, have been for a long time, since his GP3 or Formula 3, I think it was GP3 days. We interviewed him earlier this year online. He put in a superb lap in the Alfa Romeo. He's a very clean driver, Antonio, and he's getting better all the time now, lots of confidence. Part of that confidence, I think, probably came from the announcement this morning that Kimi Räikkönen had contracted COVID and would be replaced by Robert Kubica. And there's nothing like that sort of news to lift the presence of a driver like Giovinazzi in the other car. Right, I'm effectively the number one driver now. The team's on my shoulders. I'm going to give it a go. It's a little bit like Daniel Ricciardo at Spa after Lando Norris's shunt in qualifying. You know, we saw the best of Daniel in the remaining laps of qualifying. It suddenly lifted him as a driver, and that kind of continued through to the Dutch Grand Prix, where he made it through into the top 10, albeit in 10th place. I think Lando in that car on a good lap probably would have been quicker, but nonetheless, full credit to Daniel to making it through. Anyway, to get back to Antonio Giovinazzi, the big story there was how quick that car was in a straight line, 314 kilometers an hour. That was Lewis Hamilton Mercedes' last run in Q3 spec top speed. But don't forget, this car is powered by the Ferrari engine, and the two factory Ferraris, by contrast, were doing 307, 308. So there's an example of how much inherent downforce the Alfa doesn't have, and how much, therefore, Antonio was making up in terms of sheer skill and positioning the car and massaging the car and getting the best from the car around Zandvoort. So really good lap from him. This should not be underplayed, I don't think. This guy is very, very good. I callously said in a video a few months ago, no, a couple of weeks ago probably, that he would probably lose his drive at the end of the year, and the Alfa drivers next year will most likely be Valtteri Bottas and Mick Schumacher. Well, you know, on this level of performance, you'd have to say, maybe not. Maybe it's going to be Mick Schumacher and Antonio Giovinazzi. Not a bad team, actually, if you think about it. In which case, Valtteri, where are you going to go? Well, where he went today was into P3. He looked pretty good. He was always going to do a Valtteri Bottas type quick lap. But as the track evolved in Q3, and it did get quicker during the very short run of Q3, Valtteri was the only driver that didn't actually go any quicker on his second run. You know, we've seen that before with Valtteri. It's kind of a strange thing. And he always says, well, I don't really know where the grip went, don't really know what happened. Well, you know, what happened is he starts to overdrive with his inputs, tries to get more out of the car, having looked at Lewis's data and segment times, and suddenly he's overdriving, braking a little bit too late here, doing that there. Speaking of Valtteri and braking, there were some interesting graphics on the screen this morning comparing Fernando Alonso in the Alpine, who also made it through into the top 10, good for him, as did Esteban Ocon, comparing Fernando Alonso's braking into turn 3, which is the bank left-hander, with that of Valtteri Bottas. Now, it's really interesting because they both braked at exactly the same point, and yet Fernando comes out of the brakes sooner than Valtteri Bottas. No surprise there really, because as I've said before, Fernando is all about just getting the car in and then getting out of the brakes as soon as he can and just massaging the car, whatever it's going to do, with amazing footwork and handwork. And it was really good to see that graphic confirming that Fernando is all about the middle phase of the corner, whereas Valtteri is all about braking as late as he can. And you know, and they were both braking pretty late. I think he was a little bit later than Fernando. But the key there was that Fernando was coming out of the brakes sooner than Valtteri and was quicker overall through the corner. There was another graphic showing that Fernando got on the brakes earlier than Lando, no surprise there. And there was another one, a great one, comparing Lewis and Max. I think it was into turn 1, but anyway, it was a heavy braking area. And in this comparison between the two great early brakers of Formula One, Max was actually braking earlier than Lewis. I'm sure if Valtteri was there, he would have been sort of like 100 meters further down the road. But no, I mean, that of course is what it's all about. And Max's lap, to sum up, was all about early braking. It was all about getting the car beautifully flat as he's doing the changes of direction. And it was all about input. It was all about supple input. There was nothing white knuckle about anything that Max Verstappen was doing. You could even hear it in his tone of voice under pressure. In the last run of Q3, he's sitting there in the pit lane. The pit lane's open, and he's just sort of waiting for instruction to go out with traffic. And he just says calmly, I don't think we should be sitting in the pit lane for that long. And it was just nice. You know, there was no hype to the voice. It was very, very calm and relaxed. And that was what Max's lap, for me, was all about. It was just about perfect rhythm and timing and getting the best from this amazing Adrian Newey Honda-powered car. Just a fabulous racing car to watch around Zandvoort. Other laps, very good lap from Pierre Gasly, P4, and just to reiterate, 3:07 on the straight compared with Lewis Hamilton's 3:14. But the same time as Max Verstappen, so he's in good company, 3:07. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz in the end, 5th and 6th. Charles put on a bit more front wing towards the end of Q3 and lost the rear a bit. Nonetheless, did well to out-qualify Carlos on a circuit which really should be fairly neutral for both of them, I think, because as I said yesterday, there isn't a sort of Charles Leclerc corner where Carlos Sainz is going to be blown away, and all Carlos needs to do, which he can do under pressure, is a very clean lap, particularly after that shunt he had this morning, when I think he probably would have dug a little bit deeper and focused a little bit more. And Antonio Giovinazzi 7th, ahead of the two Alpines, who, as I said yesterday, the Alpines look very good around Zandvoort and have done all weekend. Just as a bit of fun, and we shouldn't do this too often because everybody makes mistakes, but I would say this is a disclaimer that when Formula One predict the qualifying results, they do so based on their access to data that nobody else in the world has apart from the Formula One teams, i.e. data that relates to tyre wear, fuel load, and the speed of the car at any given moment on the circuit compared with that of others and its teammates. They got Verstappen on the pole, not that difficult to predict. They got the two Merc drivers the wrong way round. They had Bottas quicker than Lewis, and I should just say that on that second run, Lewis was really impressive. Apart from replicating the lap that Max had done in his first run, Lewis's second run was 0.3 quicker than he'd gone previously, and that is a big chunk of time to have found, and it was really, really impressive to watch him as well. Classic racing driver Lewis Hamilton stuff. Perfect lap, you'd have to say. Perfect lap for Max Verstappen. These two icons racing one another tomorrow in cars virtually the same lap time, but very different in the way they do it. That's what's going to make the race so fascinating. So that's it. 1 minute 8.923. I still can't get my head around that. I think it is just incredible that both Max and Lewis did exactly the same lap time in the same session. Max did it first and then went slightly quicker. I think the last time we had that was something like the 1997 European Grand Prix at Jerez, when three drivers supposedly qualified all within 1,000th of a second. Although I think at the time everybody thought, yeah, you know, Bernie and Charlie sort of doing the timing on that day just to make Formula One grab the headlines. But this was a real thing, and you know, the magic of it, the beauty is that same lap time, very, very different composition and the way that lap was put together. But I think it, you know, it just shows we got Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, these two incredible drivers. And we're lucky to have them both in a race like that tomorrow, both on the front row. And, you know, thinking about it, what's it going to be like? You can go around the outside, probably at the first corner, and sort of stay there. I mean, Mario and James Hunt eventually ran out of road. I think James ran Mario out of road, didn't he? Well, James wouldn't like me saying that. You can't pass on the outside there. Yeah, man, you got to... Anyway, you know, potentially you can do that. And then you got the bank corner, and you can probably go in there two abreast. Hansrug. But then, you know, it's going to be really difficult. And I think Lewis is going to be thinking, you know, off the line, like, yeah, sure, he's on the dirty side of the road. But, you know, it's going to be this after you, Claude thing, isn't it? They're both early breakers. Somebody's got to break later than the other. Let's see what happens. We know what happened in Barcelona when nobody wanted to break late. But here at Zandvoort, probably it'll be a bit different. Can't wait, actually, for that first corner around Zandvoort. After that, they're all starting on the soft tyre as well. So in terms of strategy, it's going to come down to making the tyres last, who comes in first, who run a longer stint. And in that respect, you've got to say the odds favour Max because he's in front. And usually the car in front can do more tyre management, logical tyre management, than all the people behind taking his crud. Just thinking of all that and leading the Dutch Grand Prix and everybody else behind you. I know it was a very different circuit then, but it does remind me of that 1960 Dutch Grand Prix when Sterling had that very good win at Monaco, and he'd had quite a lot of flack for not pushing Jack Brabham a bit harder and getting near him. And his point was always, well, you know, Jack's always throwing stones and stuff off from the back of the car. No, Sterling, you've got to push him harder, push him harder. So in that Dutch Grand Prix, he decided to do that. And guess what? Jack went over some rock about this big, went straight back into Sterling's car. None of that will happen tomorrow, of course, but it will be an advantage for sure to be at the front of the Dutch Grand Prix tomorrow. There'll be a lot of traffic. It's going to be difficult to overtake. There's 2 DRS areas, but the main straight has this long, fast bank corner. Very difficult to be close enough coming out of that to take advantage of the DRS. And the other one, of course, is that back straight out of the tight corner. And it's out of the chicane, and it's going to be difficult there as well, I think, to be near enough to overtake. Anyway, we'll see tomorrow. Interesting race coming up. See you then.